everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the reset roads. Now this should be interesting because I came across a unique phenomenon that I hadn't come across before, and it's all related to this concept of legacy sediment that has accumulated during the early colonial periods, at least in North America. So just to set this up, a little bit of a recap, it turns out that all throughout the eastern United States there is what's being referred to as legacy sediment or historic sediment, and you can witness or observe it along the banks of a lot of rivers and a lot of these creeks, streams. And in essence, what we are now being told is that a lot of the sediment you're seeing along these streams, creeks, rivers was deposited rapidly during the colonial period. So the actual original grade or ground level is a lot lower than what you're seeing. But today we have this new ground level, and all this was deposited during the colonial period. And they can tell that because there are a lot of dams and they have mills associated with the dams. And those dams and mills, they date to the colonial period. So, and they can see the sediment is trapped behind some of these dams, so they can link the two. So I've been looking into this now for the last several videos, but I came across a unique phenomenon. And before I get to that, I just want to give you a sense of how much sediment has accumulated in some of these areas. I was looking at this one paper talking about this one area in Umstead State Park, which is, I guess, just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's this creek, Richland Creek. So there's these embankments, which can be as high as from 3 to 10 feet. And it's all this legacy sediment from the colonial period. And they're speculating on how much sediment has accumulated in this particular area. And they came to the conclusion that it would take the filling of 130,000 of these dump trucks, basically, full of all this sediment. And they're saying that if you lined all these trucks back to back, it would extend from basically from Raleigh to Annapolis, Maryland. I guess that's approximately 500 kilometers each way. That's their calculations. So you'd have this stream of trucks filled with legacy sediment. And that's just from this one area within a state park. And you have this all throughout the eastern United States. So very interesting, just the amount of it. But as I was looking deeper into this, I started coming across some of these, what they're referring to as these buried colonial period roads. A lot of them seem to be these log roads, and just a couple of different papers talking about these buried colonial period log roads that are buried underneath all this rapidly accumulating sediment from the colonial period. And this is just from the New England river valleys, and this one was somewhere in Pennsylvania. They weren't too specific about it, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to look into this concept of these buried colonial period roads, and that's going to lead us into talking about these what's referred to as corduroy roads. So let me play you a minute-long video. It's going to lead us into this topic.
To most folks, these old logs jutting out along a Huron River canal near Jefferson Avenue probably look like driftwood washed up on the banks. They are, however, the most significant historical find in Brownstown Township. Preserved for nearly 200 years in muck, this is the main supply road for General William Hull in the War of 1812. Gerald Wykes has studied the road for years, but until this past winter and spring, it was mostly underwater. The recent low lake levels have exposed this part of Michigan history.
This log road would basically be the first leg of Jefferson Avenue, because once you go up this hill and through all these weeds, you'll see where the current Jefferson Avenue basically follows the same course.
And while so much has changed since then, so much has not.
Okay, yeah, very interesting stuff. And apparently, the section of road that's represented here was constructed in 1812, but I think that this road is older than we're being told. And here's just a graphic showing you the full extent of that road at one point, and they're saying it would have been about 200 miles long. So interesting. You know, I had never heard of these corduroy roads, and that's just the name they've given it because of its appearance. But this particular road was considered one of the early interstate highways as well. And I think I read that it was actually the first federal highway in the US. So that's the narrative, but I think this stuff is older, and I think it was buried at one point. And I came across a blog, somebody who went out to take a look at this particular site, and yeah, as mentioned in the video, this particular section of road was exposed as a result of the Great Lakes dropping a few feet in 2000. But he goes on to mention, this person in their blog, the first thing I noticed was the size of some of the logs, clearly belonging to a very different forest than the one I was looking at. So yeah, as part of this rapidly accumulating sediment, a lot of the original trees, basically there's no trace of them anymore. They're buried underneath this sediment. So as I kept looking for more examples of these corduroy roads, I came across this find from, I think it was 2016. They found one of these roads under Waterloo, which is in Ontario in Canada. But you can kind of observe some of the remnants of this road, and I think they date it to like early to mid 1800s, but I think the depth they gave was approximately 2 meters, but just really interesting stuff. And I guess they found another portion of this road discovered beneath King Street in Waterloo. So I had never heard of these roads actually before, and it's interesting that they're associated with this early colonial period as well, at least in some cases. But yeah, I find them an interesting phenomenon. And there was another portion of a corduroy road found in northern New York State, the Wilson Hill site. And in this particular paper, they were showing some of the different locations where they have found portions of these types of roads. And this particular Wilson Hill corduroy road, it's along the St. Lawrence Seaway, but there's just, even within New York, they've found several sites, and they gave a graphic showing some of these sites scattered throughout the United States. But just this whole idea that a lot of these roads might have been buried at the same time, you know, at some point in our past, but explained away differently at different sites. Yeah, I think that's about all I have on this subject for now, just to kind of keep it short. Interesting phenomenon associated with all this legacy sediment. I think there was an event in our past, and it's not in the history books. It's explained away as different things. That's kind of where I'm at right now. But just to kind of give an example of this concept of how we see typically, at least in a lot of these colonial sites, you know, you have these two phases, this early colonial period, which is buried, and then there's a more historic period which sits on top of it. And I just want to give an interesting example of that. In Parramatta in Australia, there's this one site I want to touch on because it's going to exemplify this point. They found a bridge within a bridge. So within this historic bridge called Lennox Bridge in Parramatta, they found another bridge within it, and they didn't know anything about it. And another reason why I'm really intrigued by this particular bridge is because I talked about this site in another video. I think it was the video called Colonial Apocalypse. Underneath this parking lot, there were some historic finds found underneath this parking lot, because I believe they're going to be building a new museum in this area. And underneath this parking lot, they came across what appears to be an industrial brick structure, and they're dating it to possibly between the 1820s and 1850s. So very close to where they found this buried industrial site. There's a buried bridge within this bridge. And this all came about because this Lennox Bridge, They wanted to create two pathways on either side of the river, and in doing so, they stumbled upon this buried bridge. And this Lennox Bridge, we're told it was built, I believe, in the 1830s, and the person who built it, they just built over this other bridge, which I believe was called the Jail Bridge. What was interesting to me as well is that nobody knew this other bridge was there. And you can find lithographs showing this jail bridge from 1826, yet nobody remembers it. You can also find, what was this, a painting from 1809 showing this bridge, we are told. But again, when it comes to the reality of things and people's remembrance, and it just nobody remembers these things. And let me just play you this 40-second clip talking about this bridge.
Look, Parramatta, after the centre of Sydney, is the most historic place in urban Australia in terms of European settlement. The plan was laid down in 1789. We're opening two portals on the riverbank level.
This site is important to the whole state because it's one of the most important old bridges built in the late 1830s.
So we had done a lot of research on the history of the bridge. And so none of us knew that we'd find an old bridge inside. None of us knew exactly how Lennox had built his bridge. None of us have actually ever seen, since 1935, inside the DMR bridge.
So there you have it. Yeah, I just wanted to show you this example of these two phases, these two periods, and how there's always this amnesia that seems to creep in. And, you know, just like the buried blocks of Melbourne in the central business district of Melbourne, Australia, they started finding all these buried blocks. Nobody remembered it, even though it occurred within the last, 170, 80 years. Everybody forgot about it. So, I think this Lennox Bridge, I think it might have been there already when people started showing up. And we're just told that this person, Lennox, built it. And that's why nobody knew there was actually a bridge within the bridge. But again, that's speculation. I don't know that, but that's just how it appears, at least at this point in time. So it seems like something happened at some point, and it's not in our history books, at least in a recognizable way anyway. So I just wanted to share these corduroy roads with you and just this finding of the bridge within the bridge. So interesting stuff. So I think that's all I have for you for today. Let me give a big shout out to my patrons. Really appreciate you guys and all the support you give me. So thank you very much. With that being said, until next time, take care. Bye.